Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Today we will look at the different kinds of parallelism as the understanding of the notion of parallelism in the last few lectures has helped us understand that why the writers use parallelism, what functions it performs in literary writing, and how a particular effect is achieved with the help of parallelism. Since poetry adopts many techniques for the sake of impressing the reader or for the sake of making the writing memorable, now parallelism is one such device that through multiple techniques can enable a writer to make a memorable and lasting impression upon the reader. And it is not merely verbal repetition or the repetition of a sound. Rather, parallelism through the very effective means of identity and contrast can convey a very deep or profound idea. Because when a writer chooses to foreground a feature of his work with the help of parallel structures or similarity in structures, he on the surface seems to attract the reader with identity and consistency in the writing. But a more deeper exploration of the device of parallelism highlights the fact that behind this apparent similarity, order, balance, structure and symmetry can be found something that would be paradoxical, antithetical, or you can say contradictory. So if parallelism operates at such complex levels where the reader has to first identify the similarity and identity, then he has to identify what are the elements that are antithetical and in contrast, and what do they reveal about the idea, the theme, the subject matter of the poem. Apart from that, parallelism performs a number of functions, not just for the writer, but for the reader as well. For instance, the first and foremost function of parallelism, as we have seen in the last few lectures, is that it aids memorability. The quality of a song or a lyric or a poetry is that it, with the help of certain repetitions of sounds, words, and similarity of structures, balance, rhythm, and rhyme, creates such a structure that leaves an impression upon the reader that he does not forget those lines. So due to the rhythm and meter and rhyme, the parallel structures become easy for the reader to remember. Apart from aiding memorability, which helps us or the poets make use of parallelism so repeatedly and easily, is that it also aids in presenting something that is the relationship of contrast. Now, the equivalence that is established through the use of similar structure is also accompanied by contrast or contradiction. Now, contrasts and contradictions help a writer to convey those ideas which are perplexing, confusing, or which reveal certain ironies and contradictions in the world, in the surrounding, in the issues that they discuss. Then, apart from identity, contrast, and memorability, another important function of parallelism, as we discussed, is that it is used for emphasis. So when a writer, through parallel structure, leads us to a thought by building it step by step with similar structures, we find that he has helped to emphasize something. The repetitions and order and the hierarchy of the structure, which is leading towards a climax or a more important a thought, is something that is associated with rhetorical emphasis. The art of speech writing is that it should convince a reader. It should make somebody who reads it or listens to it agree with the viewpoint. So, to make somebody agree, to impress somebody, the device of parallelism is very useful because it lays emphasis or stress upon certain ideas through building up it through gradual progression of the structures, and also it is used for the sake of making us reach to the climax. Now, a climax can also be reached with the help of parallelism, just the way we looked at certain examples yesterday, that in the previous lecture, that when we were observing Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, where we had discussed the example, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you trickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? If you wrong us, shall we not revenge? Now, the force of the revenge is revealing the climax, or the very most deeper thought, or the profounder idea that the writer has wished to present to the reader. So this is the way we have looked at the functions, various functions that parallelism performs, and when we study the relationship of identity and contrast, it definitely leads us to interpretation. So parallelism, just like deviation, is one of the ways in which a writer sticks to the rules and regularity and foregrounds the features of the work, either in the form of similar or antithetical or contrasting structures. And it helps him to make a reader remember the lines, to make a reader get impressed and convinced, and also to reach to a climax and emphasize something and aid the memorability of the piece that he has created. So with this summary of the previous connection that today's topic has with what we had started with as foregrounding is leading us to understand and explore further ways through which something can be brought to light. So if parallelism is one of the features or techniques through which a writer can deviate, or a writer can break the norms of conventional writing or conventional speech, we find that in parallelism the conventions are broken in a way that a writer sticks to extra regularity. It's not simply regularity, but it is extra regularity, because it is again breaking the rules of the conventional way of speech and writing. So in this way it becomes foregrounding, it becomes the highlight or the focus of a piece of writing. Today we will look at various kinds of parallelism, just the way we looked at various kinds of deviation. Even like deviation, parallelism too has got certain kinds and forms through which it operates, and even within parallelism there are many forms available to the writer, especially the poets, who can explore these forms, who can use these forms, and who can decide which purpose they wish a form or a kind of parallelism to fulfill. It can be merely repetition of sounds or words, and it can be inversion as well, or it can be the building up of thought upon thought and leading it to climax. Now for all these purposes, different sets of parallel structures are available. So which particular form or kind does a writer choose depends upon the idea that he wishes to present to the reader. As we know that parallelism is the use of components in a sentence that are grammatically same, that are grammatically identical, or they are similar in their construction and their sound, in their meaning, or even in their balance or meter. We find examples of parallelism not only in poetry or in literature, but even everyday speech also, or the discourse outside literary discourse abounds in examples of parallelism. For example, the jingles or the nursery rhyme, the tongue twisters, these all make use of parallelism. Even the jokes or the sort of puzzles also make use of parallelism. Parallelism is used as a device that adds balance and rhythm to sentences, and it gives ideas some sort of smooth flow, and that is what the smooth flow is used for, that it aids to convince the reader, it aids to make the reader remember the facts or ideas presented, and it can serve as a persuasive device or technique, because repetition allows parallelism to persuade or to convince those who read it. Observe this example, that is a simple sort of grammatical parallelism that reveals the similarity of structures that are used or created by a writer. It states, Alice ran into the garden, into the room, and into our hearts. Now, these three phrases are constructed at the similar pattern, on the similar pattern. And Alice running into the room, into the garden, into our hearts creates flow, creates rhythm, creates balance, and even it leads to climax too. Because running into the room and garden is a pretty ordinary a thing. It's running or moving in the material world. But the room and garden are followed by hearts. Heart is not an entity like a room or a garden where somebody can tread or walk. But since Alice as a child has won the hearts of the people, she has filled up the house as well as the people who live there with her love. That is why the writer mentions Alice walking into the room and garden as effortlessly as she can walk in a room or a garden and make it feel animated. She has turned the hearts of the dwellers of the house the same way. She has touched their hearts. So this is how parallelism functions. And in this simple sentence, we see the use of grammatical parallelism where the phrases or the clauses are balanced. Alice running into the room, into the garden, into the hearts, and then leading to the climax as the thought is built up upon the word room, garden, and leading to the hearts. So, as it is what beautifies a text, it performs the function of creating symmetry, order, balance, rhythm, and persuasion for the reader. Now, this repetition of a phrase not only gives the sentence a balance and a rhythm, but it also gives it a flow, and it leads to a profounder thought that can be referred to as the climax, as Alice now occupies the heart. Her running into the garden and room might be trivial, but where she has reached is the heart. That is more significant idea which the writer wishes to present. That is why that idea was put at the end, in the third phrase of the sentence. This repetition we see can also occur in similar structured clauses. For example, you often come across songs which make use of repetition and order and balance. That is nothing else but parallelism, a literary parallelism that they operate on. Observe this line or a little piece of lyric from a song that is, wherever you need me, whenever you need me, wherever you need me, I will be there for you. So in this line from a song, we notice wherever and whenever are corresponding, and you need me and you need me is similarity or repetition, and being say I will be there for you, that is the answer, that is the emphasizing the idea that is being emphasized by the writer. So being there for you is what the writer or the speaker or the lyricist wants to emphasize, and the presence of the person in the form of place as well as time, with whenever and wherever, has been mentioned in the beginning of both the phrases, the first two phrases of the sentence. So you can find multiple examples of the use of parallelism in songs, in poems, in jingles, in the advertisements that you see or you listen to on TV, and even the slogans of the political parties or certain other slogans that are patriotic slogans, or even patriotic songs, even joking speech and tongue twisters or the riddles too. So these are the various areas where you, apart from literature and poetry, story, prose and poems, would found examples of parallelism, that is grammatical or structural parallelism, creating the similarity and repetition of structure, words and the statements. Now the very first and most trivial form of parallelism or kind of parallelism is grammatical parallelism. As the very name suggests, that grammatical parallelism makes use of similar and identical grammatical structures with little or no variation. So when a writer makes use of balance and coordinate clauses or words in the statement or a sentence, he is making use of grammatical parallelism. We find many examples of grammatical parallelism in our speech and writing also, when we make use of consistency and balance. Now, the very important principle of parallel construction, either you are writing a prose or a poem, is a simple one. That is, the reader expects consistency, and the ideas that are related to each other are referred to by the grammarians as coordinate clauses. Now, coordination between the clauses, words, sentences, and segments is what would make a construction parallel, similar, or balanced. Now, these should be expressed in parallel form, and expressions should be similar in content and function, and they can be expressed with the help of creating a surface similarity or the structural and grammatical similarity. Observe a few examples of the grammatical parallelism, and you will realize that you are also told to stick to the parallel structures while constructing a grammatically sound and correct statement. Here is an example of a non-parallel sentence. See what's wrong with this sentence, why it does not seem parallel. The statement is, she is capable, experienced, and often works late at night. Now notice what is odd. What is it that is breaking parallelism, or what is it that is making this structure non-parallel statement? She is capable, experienced, and often works late at night. See that there is a shift from a series of adjectives. The adjective capable and experienced should have been followed by a third adjective instead of a noun or rather a verb phrase. Now this verb phrase, works late at night, seems odd, creating structure that is unparalleled. Now, had this been capable, experienced, and hardworking, or committed, dedicated, or professional, would have made the structure parallel. So we see that there should have been a third adjective too, which should make the structure parallel, and the verb phrase works late at night should have been replaced by another adjective which reveals how hardworking, capable the girl who is capable and experienced is, that the writer or speaker is talking about. Now this type of error that occurs in a writing of any person or a student is where the teachers or the instructors usually call them to improve it and make their structures parallel grammatically. Now grammatical parallelism is the requirement even of any ordinary or spontaneous writing, that anyone, either he's a poet or a writer or not, is required to produce, because this adds clarity, this adds correctness to an expression. Now in parallelism, the basic point that we see with the help of the understanding of the grammatical parallelism is that a writer has to be consistent, and there should be consistency in the use of the particular grammatical features. For example, here the writer was not consistent in the use of adjectives. This gives writing rhythm if a writer is making use of similar phrases, similar construction, and constituents. So this gives rhythm, symmetry, and also creates emphasis. So if certain qualities are mentioned one by one with the help of adjectives, it would make us understand the girl's importance or the quality and her hard work and dedication better than the breaking of the rule, which is often works late at night. Now it doesn't sound much impressive and convincing too. Observe another example that is not a non-literary example, rather it is literary example from William Blake's poem, The Tiger. William Blake in his poem, The Tiger, also makes use of a parallel structure, that is repetition, verbal repetition, or the repetition of the phrases and clauses. He in the poem, The Tiger, says that, "What the hammer, what the chain? In what furnace was thy brain? What the evil, what dread grasp, dare its deadly terrors clasp. Now, look at this example where the statement, what the hammer, and then what the chain, and then what furnace, what the anvil. Now, all these, what dread, are examples of verbal repetition. There is no, complexity in it, as the series of questions seem to make a parallel structure for the reader and becomes easy for the reader also to remember or to catch what the writer is saying. Then you notice certain words which are rhyming together in the form of chain, that is rhyming with brain, and grasp rhyming with clasps is also adding to rhythm, rhyme, and creating parallel structure. So it's a very simple example of the poetic parallelism that is created with the help of grammatical construction that is symmetrical, that is similar, and that is balanced. Now here we do not notice any sort of complexity in the form of contrast, because here he has described things which are similar, identical, and in a balance. And that is done with the help of the use of repetition in the words and phrases, and also the structure, that is the overall structure of the poem. That is what it matches with the help of parallelism. Observe another example to understand the grammatical parallelism or mere repetition or simple patternism, where we see that Shakespeare in his famous play Julius Caesar utters these lines, or makes a character utter these lines. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Now look at this statement. Friends, Romans, countrymen. The author uses parallel structure in both the lines. In the first line, parallel structure equates three different groups of society. Friends, Romans, and countrymen. They have been joined, or they have been equated as three prominent forces or groups of the society. And then the second line, the author uses parallel structure with the phrases to bury Caesar, and not addition of not, and then to praise him. So this verb phrase is repeated, the same pattern, in the second part of the second line too. If we, in the first part, he says he has come to bury Caesar, he says to, he wants to praise him too. So in the second line, the author uses parallel structure with the phrases to bury Caesar and not to praise him. And the first line, he makes use of the same notion or a category of people in the form of friends, Romans, or countrymen. So this is a simple grammatical parallelism which has occurred in a play, which has occurred in the speech of a character, and that has established the idea of equivalence, that has established the idea of identity and similarity, because friends, Roman, and countrymen are grouped together. And then the verb phrase bury Caesar to and to praise him are combined, or you can say they are put side by side or made to appear parallel. Now let us move to certain types of parallelism. To study them in detail would help us understand that how literary parallelism deviates from the norms. It is not merely grammatical or verbal repetition, but there is a design, or you can say a particular a method which is used by a writer who convinces the reader with the use of similarity, either by creating contrast with something that exists, or either with the help of stair-like or a gradual progression of a thought by building up of a thought upon thought. There are various methods and kinds which a writer may use to create parallelism. There is not just one way or mode of creating parallelism in writing. Now, apart from the grammatical parallelism that may occur in prose as well, in literary parallelism or in poetic parallelism, there are many other forms available, and the first one in the literary parallelism is synonymous parallelism. Synonymous parallelism, as the very word synonym suggests, that there would be similarity that is created or heightened with the help of the use of words, phrases which repeat the same thought in pretty much the same words. So, in synonymous parallelism, the very same thought is repeated mostly in the very same words and sometimes with a slight variation. Now, you can see now the following example, that is the example of synonymous parallelism or mere verbal repetition, where you will find the kind of understanding of the fact that you can analyze it with reference to the writer's use of similarity of structure. So common patterns of meaning are sustained between the parallel lines. You can see, therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of righteous. So this idea that the wicked are standing apart from the sinners, or that the wicked are not to be privileged or regarded on the day of judgment, and the same would be the case with the sinners, who would not be acceptable in the company of the righteous, has been sustained with the help of the similarity of the construction. Then in the second example states, who may ascend the hill of the Lord, who may stand in his holy place. Now the similarity is created with the help of the same beginning with who may, then the verb ascend and stand in the hill of the Lord and in his holy place. Now hill of the Lord has been referred to as the holy place in the second. So there is pretty much the same thing that is being repeated in a little bit of variation. So who may ascend the hill of the Lord or who may stand in the holy place convey the same idea, but in a different way, with pretty much the same language or a slight variation of the words. Just the way in the last example, the wicked will not stand in the judgment and the sinners will not be in the assembly of righteous. So separating the wicked from the righteous and separating the sinners from the righteous people is what both the lines embody or convey. So this is impressive, this is memorable. You read these lines and you do not forget these lines. That is because of the quality that parallelism through the use of similarity of structure, repetition, order, balance adds to any writing. And that is why it is most abundantly found in poetry, because poetry is operating on the principle of rhythm, meter, rhyme and stress, and also the end rhyme too. So when a poet wishes to make an idea memorable and to emphasize on some idea, he may repeat it. And that repetition works as a device of, you can say, convincing the reader or making him understand something that might be overlooked or ignored in a single reading. Observe the examples of antithetical parallelism, that is the second type of parallelism. Now, the first type was synonymous parallelism, where there is use of synonyms, use of more or less same words, and that is creating repetition in the sound, in the meaning, in the words and the statement. Now in antithetical parallelism, as the word antithesis means, two things which are opposite. So when we say there are antithetical ideas, there are antithetical concepts, the words used by a writer in a poem or in a song or in any piece would be contrasting. So antithetical parallelism highlights that aspect of parallelism that is creating contrast. Now, the structure would be balanced. The lines grammatically and structurally won't be unparalleled or non-parallel, but the parallelism would exist at the level of the difference or the meaning of the words being used or the expression that are used. Now in antithetical parallelism, two opposite ideas or contradictory ideas are put together in parallel structures. They are put side by side with the same balanced composition or style or utterance. And the thought of the first line is expressed by an antithesis. Now, what is said in the first line would be reversed and would be expressed with the help of antithesis in the second line, or at times you can say that it is counterbalanced by a contrast in the second. So what the first line states is twisted or turned into an antithetical statement that is counterbalanced against what has been said in the first line. Observe this example, that within a single line there are two parts. The first one is contradicted, or you can say converted or inverted in the second part. To err is human, and the second part is to forgive divine. So that is antithetical. The act of human is to err, to make mistakes. The act of God is to forgive. So just the way we say man proposes, God disposes. So in this way you see that in the example, the tongue of the wise adoreth knowledge, and the mouth of the fool blurreth out folly. So what is said in the first line is repeated in an antithetical way, or is reversed or counterbalanced in the second line, and this leads us to understand that this is the example of antithetical parallelism. There is antithesis between human and divine. There is antithesis between knowledge and folly. There is antithesis between wise and fool. There is antithesis between tongue and mouth. Now all these antithetical ideas are balanced in a structure, but the balanced structure is also aided to highlight contrast, contradiction, or paradox. That is, the wise people utter words of wisdom and knowledge, and the fool always utters the words of stupidity, silliness, or ignorance. So this is antithetical parallelism, where the thought expressed in one line would be reversed or counterbalanced by a statement that is the opposite of the first one in the very next line. So it has to occur in a close proximity in a poem or in a writing. Observe another example for the sake of clarity of the understanding of antithetical parallelism, as we say that antithetical parallelism makes use of the device of antithesis, contradiction, and counterbalancing an act or an idea. Observe this example of antithetical parallelism, that is, good we must love and must hate ill, for ill is ill and good, good still. This is an example from a poem by John Donne, the metaphysical poet, and observe how many antithetical words, phrases, and contradictions exist within the poem that he has written. But still that contradiction and that antithetical idea is found within the frame of the grammar and structure, that is not breaking the rules of construction. So within grammatically and structurally balanced and parallel structure, there is found contrast and contradiction or antithesis. There are things indifferent which we may neither hate nor love, but one and then another prove, as we shall find our fancy bent. So the antithesis between love and hate, ill and good, you can notice again hate and love, we find antithesis. But the balance is there in the form of structural coherence, structural balance, and grammatical clarity and grammatical similarity and balance. And the antithesis is existing only at the level of meaning, that good must be loved and hate must be considered ill or avoided. Ill is ill, good is still good. And then things are different, which may neither be hate nor love. Then the proof, we shall find our fancy bent. That is the conclusion, that we might be tempted or fascinated by either of the two, either hate or love. It is up to us about which to decide. So this is how we notice that antithetical parallelism, it operates at the level of meaning. The structure might be the same balanced structure, but within that balanced and symmetrical structure, the writer may choose to use antithetical ideas that are contrasting with each other, or that are contradictory or paradoxical too. So after the synonymous parallelism and antithetical parallelism, we come to the third form, that is synthetic parallelism. The grammatical parallelism was creating symmetry, for example, using adjectives or adverbs of same kind and not replacing or deforming the structure with the help of some other part of speech or sort of segment of grammar. The synonymous parallelism operates on the principle that it has to make use of the same words and simple repetition to convey an idea which is expressed earlier too. So what is said in the one line is stressed and strengthened by either repetition of the same words, the way it has occurred in the first, or with a slight variation, the way it occurred in the first line. Then also the grammatical parallelism, synthetic parallelism, is something that is revealing the very meaning of synthesis. Now, as the name suggests, that is synthetic parallelism, it would mean that it would be composed of a number of things, not just contradiction or similarity, because it would be synthesis. It would be a made up thing. So how is it explained? In synthetic parallelism, usually the second or the third line of the unit that is not synonymous or antithetical to the first line, but it advances the thought. So to remember what is the difference between grammatical, synonymous and antithetical parallelism, you can remember it by this definition, that it advances thoughts. Like synonymous parallelism, it's not mere repetition of the same words or in more or less the same words. Like antithetical parallelism, it is not just the reversal of a thought in the second line, but it leads the thought forward, it advances the thought. That is why it is called synthetic parallelism. Why synthetic? Because the very word synthetic means that something is made up of mixing some one or more things, two or more things rather. So when something is made up of some more elements than a single one, made up with the help of mixing of two or more elements, we see that it is synthetic parallelism, because as the word synthetic suggests, that something is made up with a combination of more than two things or two things. So this is how it helps us understand its difference from the previous 2 and 3 types of parallelism, including the grammatical parallelism, the synonymous parallelism and the antithetical parallelism, that it leads the thought forward. It helps in advancing the thought. The idea that has been presented in the first line is advanced or led to be moved forward for the sake of understanding for the reader. Here, look at this example that shows the building up of thought upon thought, but a similar thought. There is a connection, because after all, parallelism is a study of, or the creation of, finding and achieving connections within the text with the help of either similar structures or with the help of grammatically same or more or less the same constructions. Observe this example from the Hebrew text or religious text, that is, mightier than the voices of many water, mightier than the breakers of the ocean, in the high place is thy Lord. Now look at the similarity of construction or parallelism found in the first 2 lines. It says that mightier than the voices of many waters and mightier than the breakers of many oceans is the voice of Lord, the God. Now, why is it so? Now, what is it building up? What is it synthesizing? So, the voice of the Lord, or the high place where the Lord rests, is mightier and huge and more large and grand than the rivers and the oceans. So the rivers and oceans become steps to lead us to the thought where God resides, or where the Lord resides. There is a more higher a place, more grand a place. So waters of the rivers might be vast, deep and grand. Waters of the ocean might also be vast, deep and grand, more than the river. But the place where God resides, the place where a Lord dwells, is most mightier and the highest a place. So this is how the voices of waters, then the breakers of the oceans, and the place where the Lord resides is the example of synthetic parallelism, because the thought is being built up by creating some notions which seem lesser than what is to come later in the third line. So many waters might be all the waters of the oceans and streams gathering into a single entity of a river or an ocean. And then that ocean is the mightier or the huge thing that is unfathomable, or that is incomprehensible or unfathomable. So the unfathomable and incomprehensible ocean that is vast, grand and mysterious. Here the idea doesn't end, but synthetic parallelism arises when the place of Lord is presented to be compared with the waters of rivers and streams and the ocean, and is deemed superior. So this synthetic parallelism also leads us to compare something said later with what has been said earlier, and find the connections, how this is a more greater a degree or a force which the writer wishes to convey to the reader, as waters of many rivers and the waters of the oceans are not as grand or as huge or as vast as is the place or the heaven where God dwells. So that is how it becomes synthetic parallelism, because it is building up of a thought. The theme is worked up by building up of a thought upon thought. So the thought that rivers are grand, rivers are plenty and many and vast, has been replaced by the thought that waters of the ocean are deeper, unfathomable and grand. Then the thought that the place where God resides would be far more greater and deeper and more mysterious, more wonderful, more powerful and magnificent than even the sea that appears pure, grand and vast, deep and incomprehensible. So that is how parallelism leads us to compare to a phenomena or two ideas and render one that is presented later as the most significant one. Observe another example of synthetic parallelism, that is, as a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. So the thought of the first line, that a father has compassion for his children, is a sort of a comparison, that father is kind, compassionate and nice towards his children because he feels for them, because he loves them. And Lord is as loving to those who are his, you can say, believers who fear him. So a father loves the children the same way the Lord loves his creation and his people. So this is synthetic parallelism, that a thought is built up by the writer through the idea that just the way a father shows compassion for his children and is kind towards the children, the Lord also shows compassion towards those who fear, a quality that through synthetic parallelism is presented, that is to fear God. Now, to fear God, there is a comparison between the notion of compassion by God, that God is compassionate to those who fear him, just the way a father is compassionate to the kids who obey him. So this simile or this comparison also helps create the synthetic parallelism, where a thought is built on a thought. Now this thought of love of a father for the children is a worldly one, whereas the thought of the love of God for the creation, who fears him, who obeys him, is more profounder, spiritual or divine. That is how synthetic parallelism builds up thought upon thought or idea upon idea. Now we move to the fourth instance or example of parallelism, as we have seen a very simple trivial case of parallelism in which we said grammatical parallelism that operates at the level of structure. We looked at synonymous parallelism that operates to create a similarity of sounds and words with the help of the repetitions. We looked at antithetical parallelism, where there was contrast on or antithesis or contradiction of the lines after the first one. The next thought that is repeated in the next line is reversing what has been said in the first line. And in the synthetic parallelism, we see that thought is built upon a thought. Now, the writer builds a thought that father is kind to children, and then which is presented later by building it on the first ground or basis. The base was to make the reader realize that God is as kind to those who fear him as a father is towards his child who obey him. So the idea of God's love, which might be invisible, which might be something that we may not witness, is presented to us by making us understand what we can see, what is observable, as it's observable that how much a father loves and dotes about his children. Now in the fourth type of parallelism, which we refer to as introverted parallelism. Now introverted parallelism, as the very name suggests, there might be inversion. Inversion means return, coming back. So remember it with this identity, that in introverted parallelism there is a return. Just the way in synthetic parallelism there was building up of thought upon thought. So to remember introverted parallelism, just remember that it is return. Now what return, and return to which place? Let us see that with the help of this example, because it states, only in God be still my soul. Only for him is my life. Only he is my rock, my salvation, and my fortress I totter not. How long will ye set about a man? Will ye dash upon him, all of you? Only to trust me from my height they pang. Then, only in God be still my soul, for him is my life. Only he is my rock, my salvation, my fortress I totter not. Now, the thought that is, only in God be still my soul, for him is my life, he is my rock, my salvation, my fortress I totter not, is repeated after the intervening material of 3 lines. How long will ye set upon a man? Will ye dash upon him? Only to trust me from the height. Now these 3 lines are the intervening material, whereas what precedes and what follows these 3 lines is the same. So it's simple as that. Introverted parallelism is when a writer presents an idea, then with the help of some intervening material, he presents some other ideas and then reverses or goes back, and he takes a turn towards the same thing that he has expressed earlier. So in introverted parallelism there is a return to the same thought after some intervening matter or material in writing. So we say that in the introverted parallelism, the idea or the thought moves or veers from the main theme and then returns to that. Just the way it's there that only in God be my soul, for him is my life, and then intervening material occurs, and then the writer repeats the same thing in more or less the same words over here. But examples of introverted parallelism might be where there might be slight variation in the repetition of the words. It's not necessary that the writer would stick to the very same structure or construction of words when he veers or returns to that same thought. But here in this example, the first 4 lines are repeated the same way. They are the copy of the first expression, but the thought is returned to after some intervening material. These are the 3 lines: from how long till only to trust me. So introverted parallelism is also easy to remember if you associate it with the word return. Here a writer conveys a thought, then shifts or moves or veers away, or is taking a turn, and then taking the turn he comes back to the same thought. So it's like taking a U-turn, coming back to where you had started from. So this parallelism is movement backward, movement toward what has been said earlier. Now observe the 5th example, or the 5th kind of parallelism, that is stair-like parallelism. Here also the name is very interesting, stair-like. What is a stair-like? Stair is a device that shows gradual movement upward, that makes use of such devices which in the literary writing or in parallel structure would lead us to maybe more grand an idea. So there's a gradual building. If you notice stairs do not abruptly move upward. Stairs take steps one by one. It's a gradual procession or progression that you take when you take a step forward or upward. So in stair-like parallelism too, the writer builds up a thought by adding to its intensity gradually. So in stair-like parallelism, the writer builds up a thought or leads us to a climax by gradual movement upward, by increasing gradually the intensity of the words and ideas that he is presenting or using in a statement or in a writing. So in the stair-like parallelism, there is movement upward, gradual progression, with the effect that intensity of an emotion or an idea is heightened with the use of words which might increase in intensity. In stair-like parallelism, the thought is repeated in pretty much the same words, and it is developed still further. So just like a stair, remember that in stair-like parallelism there is development. In introverted parallelism there was return, and in stair-like parallelism there is progression, there is further development. It would not stay stagnant or at the same level or form, because a mere repetition after one intervening material would not sound impressive, but it would just sound memorable. But to make it memorable at the same time impressive, a writer has to choose a method where he would build thoughts gradually. Look at this example, that is, Lord shall guard thee from all evil. Lord shall guard thy soul. Lord shall guard thy coming and going, from now forever more. Now, what is the progression? What is the development in this example? The writer begins by saying that God shall guard you from evil. Guarding a person from evil is taking care of a person's life, saving him from accidents, troubles and dangers in his life, is his being, his body. Now, guarding the soul is a step further, that we move from body's protection to the protection of the soul, that matters more than the material or the carnal body. Then guard thy coming and going. Coming and going is the birth and death, that a nation or a race is blessed, that not only its body, its people will be blessed, but their souls too will be blessed, and the souls not only in their life but also after death. So see how it's building up of thought. You just have to concentrate on the meanings of a line to identify the stair-like parallelism. Because how is it stair-like? From guarding of the body, it is reaching to the guarding of the soul. From guarding of the soul, as it is reaching, that soul and body might exist in the world where we live, but even it would guard the comings and goings, that is the birth and the death, the event or the process. And from now forevermore, that it's a promise that now that the person has proven to have qualified for the test, he will be always under the blessings of God. He will always be under the hand of a force or a God who would bless them. So a nation or a force or people are being blessed as not only their bodies, which are material, are safe from any harm or evil, but the soul is also guarded against evil. And then the soul and body not only are guarded to live peacefully in the world, but even all the races of that people who will be born or who would die would be blessed and would be safe. So if they will be safe, it means that this is the major thought, that from now onwards they are blessed. A curse has been lifted or a good tiding has been announced to them. So to recap this, that stair-like parallelism is building a thought gradually by developing it. There should be development, there should be increase in intensity and expression in the stair-like parallelism. And in the emblematic parallelism, we notice the development of the additional ideas too. So let's move to the sixth form of parallelism, and for the sake of removing any confusion or mixing up of these ideas, we will have a recap also to understand how are they different. Now observe this last example, that is emblematic parallelism. Emblematic parallelism, as the word said, it's emblem. And how to differentiate it from stair-like parallelism, or how to differentiate it from introverted parallelism? You can differentiate it on the basis that the emblematic parallelism makes use of another literary device, that is simile. So in emblematic parallelism, there would always be the use of a simile. What is simile? Comparison of one thing with another with the help of the words as, like, and such as. So in emblematic parallelism, there would be found the use of a simile for comparison. Here, the writer builds up thought upon a thought with the help of a use of a simile. Observe this example and that you will understand it more clearly, that why emblematic parallelism is different from other parallelisms, because there is use of a simile in it. Jehovah my God, early I seek thee, my soul does fame for thee, my flesh does faint for thee, like a land of drought it thirst for thee. Now observe this line, that he has created a simile, compared himself, his thirst for being with the God or being with the Lord is like a land that is facing a famine or a drought, a thirsty land without any water, without any rain, is what he compares himself with. So a person without God's help, without God's guidance, is as barren, as dry, as hot, as thirsty as is a desert where there is no rain, where there is no river. So this use of a simile is adding to the parallel structure and making it emblematic, because he says, my God, early I seek thee. Then he says, my soul does fame for thee, my flesh does faint for thee. There is similarity. My soul does fame for thee, my flesh does faint for thee. And you can also notice antithesis between soul and body and flesh, and fame and faint also. And then the line where the simile occurs, like a land. Now the very word like shows that this person is thirsty, this person is about to come to the end of his life because of the wrath of God, or the distance from God, as a thirsty land, as a deserted land. So the simile of a deserted land, that is comparing a land of drought without rain and water with the condition of a man who wants God's presence and intervention in his life. So if he has got God's blessings, he would be happy. Since he doesn't have God's blessing, he is feeling like a deserted island or a place that is thirsty. So this is how the emblematic parallelism functions, as it operates with the help of a simile. So if a simile is used in a statement, or in the lines which are built up upon each other, then we would say that it is emblematic parallelism. Now, one thing is to be made clear, that any use of simile in poetry is not emblematic parallelism. That simile which is connected with what has been said earlier and is building up a thought would only be called emblematic parallelism, because similes occur at many places in poetry. But any simile that is not structured within the parallel framework or within the balanced utterances or structures, that cannot be emblematic parallelism. So to be emblematic parallelism, a construction must have lines or structures that occur before it and that are leading to a more profounder a thought, which would be expressed with the help of a simile. So that is when we find that emblematic parallelism make use of a simile, because the earlier lines build up something that leads to the very climax, where a writer makes a comparison of one thing with another with the use of a simile, and he builds up thought upon a thought with the help of a simile. So, that is how we locate, or we identify and explain the emblematic parallelism, as make an association between the word emblem and simile. And you will remember a connection, that emblematic parallelism is making use of a simile and creating a parallel structure that culminates in the form of a simile with a comparison. To recap these types, to remove any confusion or doubt, as we will remember emblematic parallelism as such a form of parallelism which relies on a simile, building up of a thought upon thought, and then making it thought reach to the climax or its point of emphasis with the help of a comparison through simile. Stair-like parallelism, as the name suggests, would build up a thought gradually. It is repetition, but in that repetition something is increasing in intensity and value, because stairs gradually lead us to the destination or lead us upward. So stair-like parallelism would also lead us upward, because certain mild things would be leading to more intenser thing. The way we notice in this example, that a man's body will be guarded, a man's soul will be guarded, and a man's death will be guarded. So this is stair that is created by a writer, a step-by-step progression of the state of the life of a man in the world, state of life of a man at the spiritual plane in the world, and state of life of a man when he departs from life. It would be blessed too, if Lord has mercy on him. So it is stair-like parallelism, where a thought is built up upon a thought gradually and is intensified further in meaning and impact. Now moving to the fourth parallelism that we move in backward form is introverted parallelism. In the introverted parallelism, we recognize there is return. The writer would return to the same point, stressing it or expressing it in pretty much the same words or the same phrases, so that it is remembered by the reader. It becomes memorable to the reader. So a writer returns to the same thought in pretty much the same word or maybe a slight variation of words, and then there would be intervening material, because what he begins with is what he would lead the reader towards, and completing the circle. That is why we call it introverted, because there is movement backward, there is return within. So from where he started, he would lead us to that point once again, and it will be termed as introverted parallelism. And we associate introverted parallelism with change or with return. So there is a change that occurs within the lines as the intervening material, and then there is a return to the same thought or idea that occurred in the beginning. The third type of parallelism that we looked at was synthetic parallelism. As the very word synthesis was discerned as a mixture or combination of two or more things. So in synthetic parallelism, there is, you can say, building up of thought upon a similar thought without any complexity. The ideas are added and they are more or less similar. They might not be increasing in intensity. They might not be, leading to some climax, but they are intensifying the thought. They are repeating the thought for the sake of emphasis and clarity. Then we looked at antithetical parallelism, that in antithetical parallelism there is found contradiction or contrast or antithesis, because what is uttered in the first statement or line is what is contradicted in the next. So the writer utters an idea, and then the opposite of that idea is presented parallel to that, side by side that. For example, to err is human, to forgive divine. Then the tongue of the wise adoreth knowledge, the mouth of the fool blurth out folly. Then the first form of parallelism that we looked at today is synonymous parallelism, that is similarity in aspects which are presented in the two lines, and the connected lines are more or less conveying the same idea in more or less the same way. It might be just mere verbal repetition with the same word or phrase construction, or there might be a slight variation, the way we notice in these examples that the wicked will not stand in the judgment, sinners will not be there in the assembly of righteous. So the idea is the same, but the words are a bit different, and that is how synonymous parallelism creates common patterns of meaning, and which is sustained between parallel constructed lines having the same structure and order or symmetry and grammatical construction, but the words might be slightly different. The theme or subject is the same. So apart from these literary types of parallelism, we also looked at grammatical parallelism with the help of the fact that if there are phrases like adverbial phrases or coordinate clauses, then the writer should stick to parallel structure without making intervention of something that is maybe a verb, a phrase, or a statement. So these types like grammatical parallelism, synonymous parallelism, antithetical parallelism, introvert parallelism, emblematic parallelism, and stare-like parallelism, they all are the varieties or forms of parallelism which operate on a different principle, which each of all these types performs various functions. It depends upon for which particular purpose does the writer use it, and for what sake of impact does he want to make use of parallelism. So if he wants a reader to lead to a climax, he would make use of stare-like parallelism or emblematic parallelism. If he wants a reader to remember something, he would make use of synonymous parallelism or antithetical parallelism or introverted parallelism, because he would return to the same thought. So where there is repetition or return, memorability is the concern of the author. If there is building, there is gradual progression, there is building up of thought upon thought, either in the emblematic parallelism or in the stare-like parallelism, we notice that the writer's purpose in synthetic, emblematic, and stare-like parallelism is to lead us forward, to lead us to climax, and also for the sake of rhetorical emphasis. The most significant idea is conveyed later and is built up or gradually developed. So I hope that today's understanding of the various types or kinds of parallelism have become clear with the help of the examples that we looked at. Though the titles of these types are a bit difficult, but if you remember them with the help of certain identifications, like a stair-like parallelism is gradual building, emblematic parallelism is associated with the simile, and the synthetic parallelism is associated with the combination of two or more ideas as it is this synthesis. Then you will not forget what each represents, and then remember it with the help of a few examples. Then you may be able to even identify the examples of parallelism in other works too, keeping in view which examples have been discussed in the lecture today. So for the sake of clarity and understanding of the same, we will do a recap of these types in the next lecture before we proceed with the next topic in the next lecture. So it's all for today. The topic of parallelism has come to an end. We started with its introduction by the study of its functions, its elements. We moved to its types. So with the help of the understanding of the types, we have come to the conclusion of the topic of parallelism, which was the second topic within the theory of foregrounding, and the first one was deviation. So that is all for today. Thank you.